what have you learned about relationships from our dynamic, and how do you think um, you being someone with ADHD, how do you think that affects our relationship in particular? Like, what are the areas of like struggle or contention?
Do the first part. So what's the first part?
Well, what have you learned about, because this is kind of your first. So, what have you learned about relationships from our relationship and our relationship dynamic? And then, how does the ADHD, I guess, play into that?
I don't know if I've actually learned anything specific. What or how I approach my way of being is by constantly investigating what I'm doing. So my thoughts, my behaviors, uh, and and trying to pull out those feelings or allow them to come out. So I don't actually have specifics that are about ADHD. What I have are experiences and ideas that maybe are similar to ADHD tendencies, or they're as well as just Ryan, part of Ryan being Ryan, and the number of years that have led to this point.
Okay.
If you ask that question again, right, because you asked for a specific.
I just think that a lot of the time our, because you asked a question, your question was about the ADHD tendencies that stand out. And I think you know what a lot of yours are, and a lot of the ones that kind of that we butt heads on. And so I guess the question was, how do you think not just those tendencies, but ADHD in you and in our relationship like affects the dynamic, and then the dynamic in general, what you've learned about it, how it's helped you grow.
But it's always, yeah, it's always at play. Uh, and it's so important to point out that uh, this isn't about identifying, for me, identifying with ADHD. It's only to say that the behaviors that I display are very characteristic of someone with ADHD. Uh, so I don't like to identify as one with ADHD. I know it's there and always um, involved in how I even engage in this conversation. But I look at it more as, or I try to look at it more as my way of being. And that's something that's constantly open. Meaning and this is so rudimentary, but to just say it out loud, I think this is something that I would want more people to remind themselves of. But how you literally are changing like moment by moment right now as we have this conversation. There are parts of us that are changing that we're not aware of. And that to me is something that is so often overlooked. So I try to remind myself, I prompt myself about that as I'm having this conversation, I'm changing and I'm becoming someone different. And I'd rather have that approach because whether it's an ADHD tendency or not, all that matters is that I'm open to the possibility of things changing.
Okay, but based on that, can you give an example then? Because we're reading the book, How ADHD Affects Your Relationships, and a lot of these, when we would read them, you'd be like, oh, I do a lot better at this, or I'm much better at this now, or I don't do this as much.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are like specific things, for instance, whether it is just your way of being or an ADHD tendency that you think you've become better at, grown at in your moment by moment changes over the last, over like the length of our relationship so far?
The structure is more malleable.
Yeah.
There's room, a lot more room for different activities. Just not feeling anxious about having to do XYZ before something else. Now, I struggle with this one still. This is a constant for me because this does come up with the perfectionism, the anxiety, the perfectionist anxiety, and that's buried, or sorry, what's buried beneath that is the shame. But that doesn't matter. What matters is I would really feel anxious about just having to change minor things,
I know. I remember.
like the simplest of things, whether it's even getting a meal somewhere else as opposed to eating the food that I had prepared for that day or for the week. It was extremely uncomfortable. But I noticed that each time that I did it, I started to do it more and more. And now it just seems like, if we stick with the food example, I'm constantly not eating my own food.
Taking it to the other extreme.
Extremes. I don't know if that is that in another ADHD.
Yeah, well, I think extremes is something with ADHD, and I think it stems from the impulsivity that we read about.
Do you think I'm impulsive?
No, but I think that's how it can manifest in you, where it's like extremes. It's either I don't do it or I do it all the way.
Yeah.
I read something else this morning about how,
What's the source though? Where'd you read it?
oh, online, I think it was on X. I saw something come up from LaPera, and then it was like a thread from hers, I think.
Oh, okay.
Um, but this person was specifically, I guess, her experience in psychology is with people who have ADHD. And it was tendencies and partnerships with people who have ADHDs that you may not realize are ADHD.
Hmm.
So, for example, the quick, this comes from emotional dysregulation sometimes, but it's like the quick reaction. So, like, we'll get into like a disagreement.
Like last night.
Okay, like last night, where you say something that um maybe like hurts my feelings, or you could have said it in a nicer way.
Right.
But then I have I have my reaction to that is to maybe shut down, or the vibe changes slightly. But then you say something in like a loud or mean tone, and then I react accordingly by like shutting down, or just staying quiet, or not being as affectionate as I was 2 seconds prior. But then you're like, then you switch automatically and go, well, now you're shutting down. Your vibe is shit. So you did something that maybe would have you like you knew in advance that what you were gonna say may have kind of led to that, but then you're surprised that it led to that. And not like last night's example was minor, but like the one from the field walk with Jazz. So what happened at the yeah, so what our little scuff that we got into, and then you reacted, you admitted you reacted, but then as a result I kind of shut down, but then you got mad at me or upset
Mm.
because I was shut down. You thought I was stonewalling you or ignoring you,
Mm.
but I was reacting accordingly because I thought you needed space and you took it the other way. So you said something, you distanced yourself. So I said, okay, I'm going to give you your space. But then now you're upset with me because you're like, you're stonewalling me. But you know what you did. So it was just, apparently that's common in people with ADHD. And I tend to do that. I'll say something that I know may trigger you or upset you or affect you differently than it would me. And then right away I'm like, well, why are you mad at me? But like I knew that what I said may have had that effect before I said it.
Right.
But apparently that's more common in people who have ADHD. It comes from the emotional dysregulation, or even the being unable to talk about your feelings sometimes, even with me. apparently it's because it feels so overwhelming and you're used to like holding it all in and not being a burden. So then even when it comes to me, you sometimes don't share unless I ask you or unless you feel like you're emotionally regulated enough to share with me.
Huh.
I'll show it to you after. But